Hey crew, welcome to week 2 of the guiding program. Today I am coming to you from a greenhouse. So for the last 4 weeks I've been on site at Rubicon Outdoor Ed Centre with a friend and we're caretaking. So I thought it would be fun to start my sessions in different locations around the place. But today I thought I'd start in the greenhouse because today's content we're talking about ecosystems. And this is a really great example of just one ecosystem. So it's a balance of different species and populations coming together to live harmoniously to, yeah, in this case, create beautiful food from these beautiful seedlings. So yeah, we're going to be talking about ecosystems, and I thought this is a fun way to start. Anyway, I'm going to show you some of the other gardens and talk to you a little bit about the imbalance of what's going on in that ecosystem. As you can see behind me, there's a range of other garden beds here, and there's been a bit of an imbalance in the ecosystem here with an infestation of the slug and snail populations. So I thought I would show you how Jess and I have been trying to restore the balance. So Jess has now been out for 2 nights collecting slugs and snails, and I joined her last night to collect a whole bunch. I'm not sure what we're actually going to do with them, but at least that way the beds will be ready to plant new seedlings, and hopefully they won't be eaten up by all the slugs. All right, so I'm back inside, ready to start this this content. So yeah, this week's program is focused around relationships between people, places, and the environment, and we're going to be starting with talking about ecology, and that's why I thought the greenhouse and the garden was a great place to start. So this is a picture of me at the Grampians. For those of you who are looking at the Grampians for this term, this is up on the Major Mitchell Plateau, a really, really beautiful part of the new Peaks Trail that's being developed in the Grampians. Anyway, so what we're going to be looking at this week is, first of all, understanding our natural environment. So we're going to start with ecology basics. I've got a YouTube clip that I want you to watch. Then I'm going to be talking to you about a particular relationship between 2 different species, or we could say 3 different species. So we've got the mistletoe bird and mistletoe. And then that will tie into, I'll talk a little bit about assessment task 3, and then I'll show you another YouTube clip which is focused on ecosystems and biomes, and that'll tie into one of your tasks for this week. Then we'll be moving on and looking at benefits of understanding the different environments we visit. So as a guide, what are the benefits in actually understanding those places that we go to in a little bit more detail? How can it enhance the visitor experience, but also how can it enhance our role as a guide? And I'll touch on why people visit natural places, and there's going to be a lot more than just the reasons that I mentioned, but just to name a few, there's a lot of reasons why people go into the wilderness, into national parks, into wild spaces, and what your role is as a guide. So I'll be covering all that content. I'll talk a little bit about assessment tasks 4 and 5, which you'll also receive in this week's email, and I'll wrap up with just recapping what needs to be completed before our Zoom session this week. All right. So we're going to start, like I said, with a YouTube clip by Can Academy, and the second one that we watch is also by Can Academy. And yeah, I think he explains things really well. I like his videos, and there's a heap more on YouTube from him. So feel free to look at that in your own time, and yeah, he's got a range of different topics that he talks about.
going to start looking at ecology, which is just a study of how life interacts with other life, or how living things interact with each other and their environment. And so you could think of it as, well, how is life interacting with living things? So that's the technical term often given as biotic factors. Biotic factors, you have the word bio in there, signaling life, or non-living things, abiotic factor. A is the prefix often for not, so abiotic is not living factors. Those are just the technical terms, but if you even think about yourself, as you watch this video, you are in an environment, you are interacting with it. There are many abiotic factors around you that you might notice, the air that you are breathing, the temperature, your access to water. But there's also biotic factors. Even if you think you're in a room alone, you're not completely alone. There is bacteria around you that you might not see. There might be other forms of life. You might have a plant in the room. Those are the biotic factors that you are interacting with. That plant in that room might be producing oxygen that you are then breathing, or you're producing carbon dioxide, which that plant is able to fix and grow. And it might be interacting with abiotic factors like sunlight that it uses in photosynthesis in order to fix the carbon. We study all of that in some depth in biology. And really, ecology is a bit of a synthesis of a lot of what we, or if anything, all of what we learn in biology, because it's taking life up, it's studying life at another level, where it's not just the individual organism anymore, but it's not even just the population or the community, but we're talking about an even bigger system that is incredibly complex, and that's why it's a really interesting thing to study. Now, all of these images here are things that folks would associate with an ecosystem. Over here you have a coral reef, and some of the life is obvious. You see the coral, you see the fish here, but there's also life that you're not seeing. There's going to be bacteria in this water that's not visible, at least in this picture. And the abiotic factors are going to be things like the water temperature, or frankly, just even the existence of water, or the salt content of the water, or other minerals that are in the water. These pictures over here, you don't necessarily see the animal life, but there is for sure going to be, if you were to dig into this grass or look through these bushes, you will find animal life. You'll find insects, you'll find other animals. The trees are life, so that's going to be part of the ecosystem. If we're studying ecology, we would think about, well, how do these trees interact with the water, interact with the other species? How do they provide shelter for them, or food, or how are they dependent on the other life in some way to grow? Same thing for, in this case, the mushrooms. How is the fungus living on this tree branch, or on this in conjunction with the moss and whatever else? All of this is a study of ecology, the study of ecosystems. Now, when folks are talking about ecology, they like to talk about different scales. And so let's now think about the different scales within an ecosystem, or even beyond an ecosystem. So I have some pictures that if you watch a wildlife show, you typically see some images like this. And so since we at least are familiar with it, at least on TV, hopefully we get to visit this at some point in our life. Let's just think about the different characters here on the different ecological scales. So at the most basic scale is the individual. So write this down. You have the individual. So if we were talking about these elephants, the individual would be one individual elephant right over there. Now the next scale is the population. The next scale is the population. And if we were to stick with our African savanna theme right over here, the population, you have an individual elephant, the population would be the members of that same species that live in that area. So in this case, the population would at least include these elephants that we see in the picture. There might be a couple of elephants that are off the picture. And I should say in particular, these are going to be the African elephants. So it's the members of the same species that are living in the same place. And it's up for the classifier or the scientist, whoever studying it, to define what do we mean by living in the same place. We might define it as the people, the elephants that live within a few miles of this watering hole. You might define it as the elephants that live within a broader area. It could be, that live in East Africa or South Africa or whatever it might be. And so defining the population is all the members of the species that live in an area, but that area is up for definition. Now the next level up is the community, is the community. And that is all the living things that might live in that area, however we define the area. So for example, if this lion and this giraffe lives in the area that we use to define the population, they would be members of the community. So let me circle that. So they would be members of the community. And it wouldn't even just be the big animals that you see here. It would include all the life that is in that area. So it would include the vegetation that is in the area. It would include the bacteria. It would include the fungus. It would include any animals that are living inside of this water that you see there. Now, if you go even one more level of kind of inclusion, then we go to the ecosystem. So then we go, I'll go down here, then you go to an ecosystem. And what an ecosystem is, it's all of the living things in that community, so all of the living things in an area. And then you're also adding the non-living things, the abiotic factor. So you're including the rock and the air and the weather and the clouds and the water itself that is part of that watering hole. And a lot of times you might think that the abiotic factors, well, they for sure affect the biotic factors. If you don't have water, or if the temperature is too cold or too hot, it might be hard for a certain type of life to thrive. But it goes both ways. The biotic factors affect the abiotic factors. We have oxygen in our environment due to life on Earth. They might also affect the chemical composition of certain parts of the abiotic factors, say the water or the soil or whatever else. And if you want to get a level above an ecosystem, then sometimes you'll hear people talk about a biosphere. Which is, you can think of it as a meta ecosystem, or oftentimes in my head, I view it as a it contains all of the ecosystems that are in some way connected to each other. So fully enclosed, fully contained ecosystem. And biospheres are actually, well, I guess the most famous biospheres, or the one that we're typically referring to, is we could refer to the whole Earth as a biosphere. It has multiple ecosystems. And once again, the ecosystems, it depends what the researcher wants to define as an ecosystem. They could define it as, just something around a certain river in a certain area, just like that, or they might define the ecosystem as a broader region. But all of the ecosystems in the world are part of the biosphere that we know as, that is part of Earth. And it's self-contained because we don't think that there are that many influences from outside of the Earth. Although even there, we have to give some credit to the sun. That is providing abiotic factors for sure. We wouldn't have life on Earth as we know it without the sun. And there's also things like the moon, the gravitational effects. You could consider that an abiotic factor. Without the tides, we would not have life as we know it. But one thing that's really fun, as many of y'all know, I enjoy.
That was just a brief insight into the basics of ecology. So hopefully that painted a really clear picture for you. I'm going to now move on to sharing with you the relationship between two different species, the mistletoe bird and mistletoe. So just a moment. Okay. So as I said, I'm going to share with you this story between this beautiful relationship between the mistletoe bird and the mistletoe bush. So mistletoe, I'm sure you've heard of it. A lot of people associate it with American or English Christmas movies where people have to kiss under the mistletoe. But mistletoe can be found in different parts of the world. There's 90 different species of mistletoe, 70 of which there's more than 90 species. 90 species are found in Australia. 70 of those 90 are native. So it's a huge variety of mistletoe found in Australia. And they're really interesting species because they're known as parasites or semi-parasitic, and I'll talk about what that means later on. But essentially, parasites can't survive without living off another species. So in the case of mistletoe, it needs a host tree where it will get its nutrients and water from. And the mistletoe bush is a really important piece in the ecosystem because it provides food to a big range of animal species, natives including koalas, sugar gliders, possums, birds, and a whole variety of insects. And they feed off the berries, the foliage, the nectar, different parts of the tree. So it plays its role in the ecosystem, and it can grow off a whole range of different native species of tree. So host trees can be eucalyptus, banksias, wattles, mangroves, and casuarinas, just to name a few. This is the beautiful mistletoe bird. We have our male on the left. Like most bird species, the male is generally the more colourful and pretty of the birds, and the female is a bit more dull in colour, as you can see her on the right. So this is a mistletoe bird, and they are, a really, really awesome bird to help in the life cycle of mistletoe. But they can be found all over mainland Australia. You won't find them down in Tassie, but all over mainland Australia and as far as Papua New Guinea and eastern Indonesia. And their main food supply is the berry off the mistletoe bush. So they also collect insects, mainly to feed to their young while their young are still in the nest, but essentially their main food source is the mistletoe berry. So I've created some beautiful illustrations for you to depict the relationship between mistletoe and the mistletoe bird. So as you can see in picture 1, the mistletoe bird feeds off the mistletoe berry. So those white berries falling into its mouth are the berries. And the berries move through the really simple and basic digestive system of the mistletoe bird. And the digestive system only takes off the outer layer of that berry to reveal a sticky coating. So as that berry moves through the digestive system and comes out the other end, it generally sticks to the bum of the bird. So you can see that in picture 3. The mistletoe bird will fly to close by trees and use the branches, the rough surface of the branches, to scratch its bum and wipe its bum to get those sticky berries off. The berries then germinate and grow. Like I said, they live off other trees. So it's the mistletoe bird's job to spread those seeds and wipe them on branches and trees, where they will then germinate and grow into the mistletoe foliage or bush. So as I mentioned previously, it's known as a parasite. However, we refer to the mistletoe berry or the mistletoe bush as being semi-parasitic because it relies on that really established root system that the tree has for water and nutrients, but the leaves that the mistletoe bush produce itself contain chlorophyll, which means that the mistletoe can photosynthesize and get its own energy. So it can provide its own energy source, but it relies on the tree for nutrients and water. And it's a balancing act. So this relationship between the host tree and mistletoe it's a fine balance. If the tree is already sick or dying, the mistletoe can cause that sickness or death to worsen, in turn killing the tree. Or if there's already too much mistletoe on the tree, taking the host tree's nutrients and water, all of them or more than its fair share, then it can cause the tree to get sick and die. So it is a balancing act between being a balanced relationship, so where the host tree doesn't mind that the mistletoe's there, and then where there's an overload of mistletoe and causing the tree to die or get sick. You can see in picture 7 mistletoe in amongst the host tree's foliage. So mistletoe is quite distinct, although it does try to blend in with the host tree's foliage. It doesn't always match it 100%, and in this case you can clearly see it. It's that darker green and the teardrop shaped foliage amongst all the lighter grey green foliage of the host tree. And it is commonly found all across Australia, but in Victoria I spot it all the time driving on main roads. And once you see it once, it's hard to then not be able to spot it. So when we're allowed out of isolation and you can go on drives, I encourage you all to do some mistletoe spotting. And in picture 8, we can see the male mistletoe bird. It's the male because we can see the red on both its chest and its under its tail. There it is, starting that life cycle again. So collecting the berry, which will then move through its digestive system. It will then wipe the seed onto a nearby tree, which will then germinate and grow. And so, yeah, it's a really, really beautiful relationship, one where we call it symbiotic. So they work together to survive. So one can't survive without the other. So I hope you enjoyed my story of the mistletoe bird and the mistletoe and their beautiful relationship. And it paints a picture of, and I thought it tied nicely into talking about ecosystems. So in this particular ecosystem, ecosystems are a fine balance, and disruptions can come in many forms. But for example, if the mistletoe trees or the host trees were to be cut down in big numbers, it would then threaten the bird's food source, which in turn would threaten the spread and dispersal of the mistletoe bush seeds. So yeah, this is a really, really beautiful relationship, but yeah, there's also other species within that ecosystem that rely on the mistletoe bush as well, which were previously mentioned in one of the first slides. So hopefully you enjoyed that and learned a little bit about those particular species. But I want to go back to the start of this, because these slides from here to where I just finished are an example of what I want to see from you guys for assessment task 3. So really, to understand the message I'm trying to portray in these slides, we don't need my voiceover. I don't need to explain to you what each slide represents, because there's a little bit of information on the slide, there's pictures, and it moves in chronological order. So we're introducing mistletoe, we're introducing the mistletoe bird, and then we're moving through step by step the relationship that the two share. So this is just one example of how we can develop a presentation for people to view and gain a bunch of knowledge and information from it. Okay, so for your slides, you don't need to focus on a specific relationship between species or animals at all. I mean, you can look at the wide variety of questions that were asked in task 1, and maybe something tickled your fancy, maybe Indigenous culture or European history, or the industry that were prevalent within the area, so farming or mining or timber production. Maybe you want to focus on conflict between those stakeholders. So we've got national park versus industry, and the pros and cons of, or the for and against for what they're fighting for. Maybe threatened species, introduced species. You might talk about people visiting the area. So there's a whole range of different topics that you could touch on. That was just a few to get you thinking. But this week, I'd love to find out from you what you're going to be presenting on. Okay, so as I said, this is just an example of a PowerPoint presentation that doesn't need verbal audio over the top. All right, so we're going to move back to YouTube where Khan Academy are going to talk about ecosystems and biomes. And this will tie into one of the activities that you will be working on this week before our Zoom catch up. So I'll just get that going.
Just as a bit of a review, if we take the members of a certain species that share the same area, we call that a population. All of the organisms in this particular population will be members of the same species. There can be other members of that species that aren't in that same area, and they wouldn't be a member of this particular population. And a certain area won't have just one, or doesn't tend to have just one species in it, so we could call this population 1. You might have other populations there of a different species. So this is another species right over here, all of them combined in the same area. We could call this population 2. And if you take, and we could obviously have many more populations there, and if you take all of the populations in a given area, and there's flexibility on how you define that area or define that region, you take those together, so you're really taking all of the living things in a certain area, we call that a community of populations. Now, the community only consists of living things, the biotic factors. So let me write that down. Biotic referring to the living things in a certain area. But if we want to think about not just the living things, but also the non-living things in that region, so I'll write abiotic, do that in another color. So let's take the abiotic factors or the abiotic environment. And once again, we're sharing the same region, and that is flexible on how you define that region. You put all of these things together, and then you get your ecosystem. Your ecosystem, once again, it could be a very small region, it could be a very large region, but it's made up of all the living things, the biotic factors, and the non-living things, the abiotic factors. Now, what we're going to think about in this video is just the types of ecosystems that you might have, think a little bit about it, and also begin to think about how the different factors interact with each other, how there's a conservation of matter, where within an ecosystem, matter tends to go from one form to another. You also have a flow of energy. Energy tends to enter an ecosystem in form of light, and that energy gets transferred from one organism to another, and sometimes even involving the non-living things, eventually getting turned into actual heat. Now, in terms of the types of ecosystems, I already mentioned there's a lot of variety there. This right here is a picture of a tide pool at Half Moon Bay, not too far from where I live. I've actually been to the tide pools at Half Moon Bay. And you could consider one particular tide pool, both the abiotic factors, the water and the rock there, as well as the biotic factors, the starfish, the sea anemones, and whatever else might be living there. Those combined, that could be an ecosystem. You might say that the entire beach is an ecosystem. You might say that the entire region is an ecosystem. Once again, it depends on how much you want to zoom in or how much you want to zoom out. And you can zoom out a good bit. This rainforest right over here, this is the Amazon rainforest. You can consider the whole rainforest an ecosystem. Or maybe you just want to study, what's happening in this exact region right over there. You can also consider that an ecosystem. You can consider what's happening in the river itself an ecosystem, or maybe one part of that river. And as you notice, I'm talking about some ecosystems that are on land and some that are in water. And that is a general way of one way of classifying them. So an ecosystem, you could have it on land, you could have it on near in the water, so we could say it's aquatic. And then even within aquatic, you can have ones that you have salt water or partially salty water, and these are called marine. And the main marine ecosystem, we're thinking about the oceans and things like that. And then you have freshwater ecosystems. Like if you are in the upper Amazon, that is fresh water that is flowing. So we could say freshwater, non-salty water. And even though it looks like rivers are big and there's a lot of fresh water around us, obviously we need fresh water to live, most of the aquatic ecosystems are marine, are not involved freshwater. Freshwater is a very small subset. Now, this is just a few examples. Even your body, you could view your body as a whole as an ecosystem. You could view parts of your body as an ecosystem. You could look at just a fraction of, if this is my hand right over here, you could just take a little square there and you could consider that an ecosystem. And you can think about the different bacteria that are there, the other types of microorganisms that are there, and how they are interacting with the non-living things, the air, how they're interacting with the oil on your skin, with the dead skin cells, and also how they're interacting with the living skin cells and you yourself. Now, we're focused on how we can classify ecosystems. One thing that's often done is classifying land ecosystems into various categories. And right over here, we have depicted the major types of land ecosystems on our planet and where you might find them. And these different types of land ecosystems, these are called biomes. And as you can see from this diagram, tropical forest, you can find it right over here. This is the Amazon rainforest. You can find it in Africa. You can find it in Southeast Asia. You can find it in Central and even Southern North America. You have boreal forests, which you'll find in more northern latitudes, savanna, desert, tundra, chaparral, polar ice, temperate forests, temperate grasslands. And these are just helpful for thinking about roughly the types of ecosystem or ecosystems we would find in those regions. And it's typically most determined by temperature, moisture, the climate, well, actually the climate and the terrain and the types of minerals that you would find there. That tends to be a pretty good indicator for what it will be like, what the life would be like. But even with that said, there could still be a lot of variety. For example, the Sonoran Desert, that is right over here in the southwest United States and the northwest Mexico. This is a desert, and there's deserts all over the rest of the planet, but they won't have, they might be similar in a lot of ways, but they won't have the exact same climate or the exact same abiotic factors or the exact same biotic factors. So for example, right now I'm going to show you pictures of the Sonoran Desert and the Rock Desert that's on the island of Boa Vista. Boa Vista is right over there. You really can't see. It's a very small island off the coast of Africa. And as we see in these diagram or in this picture, you don't have to be an expert to recognize that, okay, these are both deserts. They both look dry. There's not a lot of water here, but they are also very different. The Sonoran Desert looks to have at least a lot more life than the Rock Desert have here. It's appropriately named the Rock Desert because it seems, at least to the naked eye, it looks like all you can see is rock. So biomes, once again, it's a very rough, high-level way of classifying land ecosystems. But even though they're the same biome can be very, very, the two things that are categorized in the same biome can be very different.
Okay, so hopefully that helped paint a bit of a picture about moving from our ecosystems into our biomes. And there's a task this week that will tie into those different biomes. Okay. Now I want to look at the benefits of understanding our environment. So what is the point in learning about these different environments that we visit? The locations that have been chosen, those 4 locations that you're all focused on for this term, are all areas that for the mainstream Cert 4s we were going to visit this term, most of those areas. But also they're pretty highly visited by school groups and outdoor companies with outdoor education and outdoor recreation programs. So they're relevant areas to learn about if you're going to continue with your outdoor leading. For those of you in the trainee group, if you venture outside of the YMCAs, and go and work for different companies and broaden your horizons. So I guess there's lots of benefits in learning about these different locations and different areas. And I've just got a couple of reasons here, but there's a lot more than this. So for planning reasons, it can be really, really useful to know about the area, to know about prevailing weather, to know about the landscape, the vegetation, the river levels. It can help you know what activities can take place there. So, especially if you're planning trips and you need contingency plans. Well, we can't do this because the weather's looking like this, but I know in this area this activity is really good there. There's rivers, and there are appropriate levels and there are appropriate grades. Also, prevailing weather. Well, that's a big one, especially moving into the Alpine National Park, because the weather can come through at any time. But understanding those weather patterns and weather systems can help you be prepared, managing groups, and yeah, that ties then into safety. So planning, really, the reason we plan is for safety, but planning can go so much further. Safety, there's so many reasons, and I've listed just a few there, but being able to find water if you were to get lost, if you understand landscapes, if you understand the areas that you visit, you'll know the insights and the fall of the land, and moving down into valleys to find water, and things like that, finding shelter when those prevailing weather systems come through, and then dangers and threats in the area. So depending on where you are and what activity you're doing, or what part of the area you're in, there's so many different, and the time of year, it depends on what the threats could be. So it could be blizzards and whiteouts, it could be snakes, yeah, it could be a whole range of different things. So they're just a couple to mention, okay? And then we move into the enjoyment factor. So being prepared and being safe can only lead into enjoying the experience out there. And I'm going to be talking about this shortly, but you have a role as an outdoor leader, as a guide, to enhance people's experience in those natural places. So although you want to know about the landscape and about what activities can take place in an area, and yeah, for safety and for the planning side of things, to enhance someone's experience, to actually have intricate knowledge about the area, you can share information about plant species, animal species, threats to the area, interesting facts, really fun stuff. You may know of a nocturnal animal that comes out at night and organize a little night walk and go spotting animals in the trees and things like that. And it's you're enhancing people's experience. So whether you're working in tourism with adult groups on sort of tour guided programs, adventure tours and things like that, or whether it's with school camps and outdoor ed, yeah, knowing what plant and animal species, the history of the area, a bit about the geology, the indigenous group that's local to that area, having information about that, yeah, you're going to enhance people's experience, and you're going to create a connection with that place, which essentially is a huge hat or role that we play as guides. So there's so many different reasons why people visit natural places, and these are just a few that I've mentioned, and a lot of them they sort of overlap: to learn, education, nature, wilderness experience, to explore, get away. People go and hunt, so they use the land as a resource. Some people go into natural spaces to collect firewood and water, to socialize, for mental health, which I encourage you all to get outside as much as possible during these times for your mental health. But people go out for enjoyment, adventure, recreation. For us, it's a big part of it is that adventure and recreation side. Education ties into it with knowing about the natural area, and especially working with schools, because sometimes they tie their school camps into the curriculum, and therefore knowing about the areas that you're visiting can really enhance people's experience, like I previously mentioned. But these are just some of the reasons why people visit natural places, and there's so many other reasons why. But yeah, I hope you're getting out there, outside as much as possible for yourself, for exercise, for mental health, for space, and just to switch off and get away. So, like I said, there's a big hat that you wear as a guide, and that role that you play. So I've made a little bit of a partial Venn diagram to help explain this, but you, the guide, and you have a connection with the environment, and then you've got your visitor. So the relationship between you and the natural area is an established relationship. So you obviously work in outdoor education or outdoor recreation or as a guide because you have that relationship with that natural space. You enjoy being out there, you know about the place, you love working in it, you have a passion for being outside and doing recreation activities in those spaces. You then have a visitor who wants to learn more about that place, who wants to visit that place, who wants to do recreation activities in that natural space. But their relationship with that place is just developing. It's in those initial stages, and they're just learning about the area. Where can I go running? Where can I go riding? Where can I go kayaking and rafting? And yeah, so their relationship is still in its initial stages, but it's developing. And then you as the guide have this opportunity to, one of those hats you wear is building relationships with people. So getting to know your visitors, getting to know the visitors, getting to know your clients so that you can enrich their experience and connect them with that natural place. So, the more knowledge you have about that place, the better and well-versed the visitor is going to be after their visit. You're going to help create that connection, and from connection with anything, when we feel connected to a place or a thing, we care about it and we want to look after it. And essentially, we already care about the environment. We already want to look after it because we want it to be there so we can do our fun activities, and it's going to be there for years and years to come. But our visitors may not be aware of, the principles of minimal impact, or about, I guess, best practice when it comes to visiting those places. So taking our rubbish home, or sticking to tracks, or there's a whole range of different things. But yeah, you have that opportunity to share that knowledge. And yeah, if you have a deeper connection and knowledge about the place, and you can share those little bits, interesting facts and bits of information, then the experience that visitor has is going to be far greater than if they were to have just visited on their own. And so they're going to leave that place feeling that like they've got a connection, and that they want to go back, or they want to share that experience with friends of theirs. So you play a big role in creating those connections. So as a guide, you wear so many other hats, and these are just some of the roles that you take on as a guide. So your job is to meet new people and build relationships with them. You share knowledge with them, show enthusiasm about the place, share what you love about it, what you know about it. You introducing groups of individuals to those places of interest and different travel experiences, guiding people on tours, outdoor recreation trips, adventure and nature experiences, describe points of interest and answer lots of questions. And that's the thing, the more you know, the more questions you can answer. A big part of it is researching topics related to the sites and deliver commentary, which is what we're doing in our assessments. Planning commentary and activities, which ties into that previous point. Tour guides and greet and register visitors, depending on what type of guide you are. Provide printed or digital information. Sometimes you're collecting fees and tickets, depending what sites you're visiting. And sometimes your role is to guide and plan and operate those long distance tours and expeditions, depending on what level you're at. You may be planning and organising all the logistics. You make arrangements for accommodations, they're booking campsites or accommodation if that's where your group is staying. A big part of it is dealing with unforeseen circumstances or incidents. So having contingency plans and adapting depending on what happens. And I will just say there's not one outdoor ed trip that goes to plan. You've always got to be adapting and adjusting. And you want to ensure that your visitors' needs are met. So what are their expectations on this tour, on this guided trip, on this expedition? And you want to go above and beyond so that they come away recommending that company or that national park to their friends. You may be driving vehicles, so setting up camp, driving vehicles, preparing meals, the role of a guide is, it's a long day, and that's not always going to be the role that you play, but depending on the type of guiding you do, yeah, you can be doing all those roles as well. Instructing participants, so if you need to teach them how to do an activity or a skill so that they can go on the trip safely, then you may be teaching them how to canoe or how to pack a pack and fit a pack so that they can hike comfortably, just to name a couple. And the list goes on. So organising itineraries, researching local attractions, public speaking and customer service are a big part of meeting those customer needs. Problem solving, I mentioned contingency planning before. Safety, so a big number one hat shared with fun is safety. Providing first aid or managing emergencies. And yeah, you may require a big range of skills, hence why we're doing a range of different skill sets, but some jobs may require qualifications like your Cert 4 in outdoor rec, others may not. But sometimes the qualifications required as a minimum would be wilderness first aid, food handlers, and maybe a bus license, a heavy rigid bus license. So they're just to name a few of the roles that you play as a guide. But what we're focusing on is those relationships. So building a relationship with location and place, so that you can build relationships with clients and participants and yeah, I guess foster their relationships with those natural places. So that's a big focus of what this program is about. Okay, so I'm going to now share with you, talk a little bit about assessment task 4, because that's come through in the email this week. So I'll jump to that. Okay, so this is assessment task 4, and it's tied in with assessment task 5. So you would have received those 2 documents in the email this week. And I just want to chat a little bit about these tasks. So assessment task 4 is your first presentation, and it's specifically focused around a recreation activity that can and does take place in the region that you're focused on for these 10 weeks. So I would like you to chat with the other people who are sharing your location, and I want you all to be focused on a different activity. So some of you might be interested in the same activity, so it's up to you to chat and negotiate what you want to talk about. But there's such an array of activities that take place in all these locations, and I'm more than happy to pose ideas or propose ideas. Yeah, if you're having any trouble coming up with thoughts and ideas. But I'd like to start these conversations this week, so have a think about what you want to talk about. If you can touch base with the people in your group, then yeah, and start those conversations, then that'd be great. So yeah, essentially you're going to be developing another PowerPoint like assessment task 3. However, you don't have to use PowerPoint, you can use Prezi. There's a whole range of different presentation platforms, but essentially you will be presenting. So you'll be presenting that slideshow, not just with audio. I want to see you, the PowerPoint or the slides or the audio visual, I guess, additions to your presentation are an added extra. So they will enhance what you're talking about. So you might be talking about mining, and you'll have pictures of mining that are relevant to the area. Yeah, so they're an enhancement, but essentially you're going to be filming yourself presenting about this activity. You wouldn't be talking about mining because this is specific to recreation activities, but maybe one of your other ones. Anyway, so the minimum requirements for this, I want you to focus on 3 key things. So the first one is the history of the activity. Okay, where does it stem from? Where in the world did this activity begin? And how is it transitioned over time to what it is today? Maybe maybe it was a type of, I guess, way of hunting or travel. Maybe that was a means of travel, like canoes. Canoeing has a really, really rich and interesting history, especially with Native Americans, Native North Americans, and even Indigenous Australians as one example. But I want you to focus on the history of the activity and then move into how the equipment and technology has changed over time. So there may be specific equipment used for the activity that you're talking about. And I'm sure over the years that the materials used to develop that equipment has changed. So we want to look at, from a historical point of view and how both the activity and the equipment have changed over time. And then I want you to tie that activity into the region that you're focused on. So how and where does this activity take place? You can show maps, you can show facilities, you can talk in detail about the use of this activity in your area, and you even may show some examples of, if you're doing hiking, different hiking routes or popular campsites used, or fishing spots if fly fishing or something like that is your activity. So they're the three key things I want you to focus on with it, but you can go above and beyond. You can add more if you want, but ideally those are the three key things I want you to definitely include in your presentation. Clear introduction, clear body, those are your three key focus points. I want you to use props, and slideshow is an example of props, but you may have some of the equipment that's used and you may be able to hold it and show it as well. So I want you to do that, and then a clear wrap up or conclusion for that. Now, accompanying this, so you'll be assessed on your presentation techniques, so your ability to present and share information and talk clearly and not be reading off notes, and you may have dot points. I'll talk about different techniques for presenting in future content. But there's a whole range of, I guess, criteria or things that we're looking for from the presentation. So you'll be assessed on that, and then also on the aids, so your slides or presentation enhancement stuff. So whether that's a PowerPoint presentation, whether you also have equipment, you can take on the role of that presenter, you can wear costume, you can set the scene, you can, I want you to really get creative with this. And then the final component of this presentation will be, accompanying it will be your script. So ideally you're not going to be presenting reading off the script, however you will write and learn your script, and you can have dot points to help you. You can have cue cards, things like that, but you will submit a written script, and that will accompany your filmed presentation. So that is assessment task 5, which will be submitted with assessment task 4, and you'll see an outline for that in this email. So in terms of submitting your work, if you're emailing, we might have Moodle up and running, and if that's the case, you should be able to upload your video there. You may need to compress the files so that it can be uploaded. Alternatively, you can do something similar to what I've been doing, and that is uploading the videos onto YouTube. So that's up to you, and I want you to think of the best way to do it. But videos need to be compressed if emailing out or uploading, and alternatively you've got YouTube or Vimeo or something like that. Okay, so have a think about this, and if you've got any questions, let's chat in our Zoom session. But I'll have that marking criteria in that document as well. And assessment task 5, like I said, I'm not going to open that up now, but that will be your written script, and I'll have specific information on that as well. All right, so final thing before we wrap up this session is, I'm just going to jump to showing one more screen. I'm going to jump to, back to this. Okay. So, all right. This week we're going to have 2 sessions. I'd like to do an individual touch base and a group Zoom session. So the group Zoom session, you're going to be with people who are researching different locations, because you're going to be sharing specific information around your biome, the biome region that your area falls into. So hopefully by this stage you've submitted assessment task 1. Before our Zoom session, I want you to have completed your biome region activity and had a look at the wilderness question of protection quote. And I want you to have prepared some thoughts on a for discussion and an against. So do you agree or disagree? I want you to look at both sides of that argument, and we're going to have a bit of a discussion in our Zoom session. And then in our individual session, I just want to touch base to ensure that for assessment task 3, I want everyone sorted on what topic they'd like to talk about. And I would like to, create those discussions with you if you're not sure. And then I want you to start those conversations about assessment task 4. So what activity are you going to focus on for your recreation activity presentation? And great if we can decide on that for this week. Otherwise, we can at least start those discussions. And then obviously it's an opportunity for any personal questions to do with the content or the tasks or the units. Okay, so that is everything for this week. I hope I've made everything nice and clear again, and I look forward to seeing you all for our Zoom catch up. Any questions, please hit me up via email, and make sure you're getting outside and getting some fresh air. Beautiful weather this weekend, at least on Saturday, although this comes out on Monday, so ignore that last bit. All right, have fun. I'll catch you all soon.